Hello and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. I'm sure all of us have noticed how much India's original founding fathers are very much part of today's political discourse. Why is that? Why are the beliefs and ideologies of Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, B.R. Ambedkar, Sardar Patel, Veer Savarkar so relevant to the clash of the many ideas of India today? Joining me this evening, a panel of people who have done the work, as it were, in looking at them beyond just narrow partisan perspectives. With me is Shruti Kapila, historian and political thinker. Her new book, Violent Fraternity, Indian Political Thought in the Global Age, looks anew at the people who shaped India's freedom struggle and explores themes so relevant to today. Also joining me is Amish Tripathi, director of the Nehru Center in the United Kingdom, but of course better known for his best-selling books on Indian mythological and historical figures, and Hindol Sen Gupta, writer and journalist, author also of The Man Who Saved India on Sardar Patel. Thank you all very much for being on this dialogues this evening. Dr. Kapila, if I could begin with you. Your book actually looks at all our founding fathers in a completely different perspective, and you talk very much about an intimate enmity, as it were, the intimacy of enmity.
Yeah.
Tell us about the various relationships that in a sense impacted India's freedom movement and impacts us even today.
Well, thank you. I think, as you say in the introduction, our founding fathers or founding figures were really political philosophers. They were actors, but they also laid down the foundations of modern Indian politics. So if you look at the French Revolution, you think of Voltaire, Rousseau, and the like. We don't have a philosopher mold for thinking. Our actors are our philosophers. So that's one thing. But as a historian, I was struck by one really important fact of modern Indian history. So 1857 is, of course, the largest violence against the British Empire in the Indian Mutiny or the rebellions. And Indians killed the British men, women, and children in large numbers. 90 years later, the British are singularly spared, while 1 million people kill each other, Hindus and Muslims, Muslims and Sikhs. So I was interested in what happened to the idea of enmity. Mm-hmm. Who is the political enemy? And what were the ways in which in modern Indian politics kind of steered not just anti-imperialism, but also then a very important, I mean, this sounds like a cliche, but it's the most diverse, democracy in the world. Mm-hmm. And its foundations are very different from the American democracy or the French one. And I think we needed to pay attention to what happened there rather than, so in a way I was moving away from the Constitution as the focus of our democracy, but looking at freedom struggle, question of violence, why violence was so important to all these figures. It's not that India's struggle was not non-violent. Gandhi is, of course, the icon for it. But I think all of them really thought very hard about the relationship about enmity as well as violence. And I'll say a little bit more on why it becomes intimate in a minute. But yeah.
In fact, I'd like to bring in Amish Tripathi on that, because Amish, really, we've heard so much talk about what's changed since 2014. But I think what has changed is looking at different figures of the freedom movement, maybe as one political party would say, liberating our past analysis from the hegemony of just a domination of a few, and also re-examining how modern India or young India looks at so many of, whether it is historical figures or even mythological figures, which you write about. How have you seen that change happening? It's interesting, of course, that you're the director of the Nehru Center at a time when Nehru is perhaps not the most popular figure of the ruling party.
Look, I think one of the key things to understand is that our republic was not a nihilistic creation. It was a state created on an ancient civilization. We are the only pre-Bronze Age civilization that is still alive. Mm-hmm. So we have many ancient ways that inform the way our republic would emerge. And all of the founding fathers of our republic, I should clarify in my view, they were the founding fathers of our republic, not of our nation. Our nation is a lot more ancient. But all of the founding fathers of our republic, if you read what they wrote, including Prime Minister Nehru's discovery of India, they speak of our ancient traditions and how it informs our way of life. I must clarify, it's become fashionable to see Prime Minister Nehru as all bad. I'm not a fan of that approach. There are strengths and weaknesses in all our great leaders of our independence movement, and we must see that. But if you go back to if you take a step back and see how our civilization's approach has been to violence, there is an aura of Mahatma Gandhi that we take on our freedom movement. And India, no doubt, has the most ancient pacifist traditions in the world. The most ancient pacifist tradition in the world is Jainism, which actually then later influenced large parts of Hinduism as well, especially the Vaishnav part of Hinduism and some parts of Buddhism as well. But there is another tradition in the Indian way as well, in the dharmic way. Ahimsa parmo dharma, par dharma hinsa tathevcha, that yes, non-violence is the greatest dharma, but violence in the defense of dharma is also all right. The Bhagavad Gita says very clearly that committing a sin is wrong, but tolerating a sin is even worse. So our traditions did not say that we have to be non-violent in all circumstances. And in fact, even in our freedom movement, there was a revolutionary arm of our freedom movement as well. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi's non-violent movement was exceptionally important. That should not be belittled. But there was a revolutionary arm of our freedom movement from all the way from the Gadar movement from Rash Bihari Bose. And Netaji Bose actually comes in a long tradition of that. Yes. They had an important role to play as well. We must acknowledge that too. And the reality of the modern world is, if we are facing enemies like us, I'm a diplomat, so I should not name that country, but a certain country to our north, which does, we have to be strong to defend ourselves as well. Just non-violent debate will not help our country in that situation.
And from the Indian freedom movement, of course, Lokmanya Tilak tried under sedition laws, and this is often a very current debate, Hindol, on why colonial sedition law is still used even against college students and people who cheer the Pakistan cricket team, etc. So just looking, we're going to talk more specifically on that, but just looking at what both Shruti and Amish have raised so far, it's not about good versus bad. It's not about this, the freedom fighter you believe in, depending on political ideology, is better than that one. Why has it become so polarized? You've written, of course, on Sardar Patel. We've seen a new interest, a rebirth in a sense, of a man who was always integral, some would say, to Jawaharlal Nehru's politics and to the first independent government of India.
And yet, for some parts of Sardar Patel's life, especially the latter part or the last part of his life, he could, I mean, if Twitter existed at that time, some young person would have described him as a frenemy of Nehru. They were deep French. There was a deep, rich friendship, but there were also very deep dissonances. Now, the point here is that, I'll take off from what Shruti was saying. You look at the movement of violence across the history of the national movement, and we've forgotten a lot of that history. Look at Anushanal Samiti, for instance, right? When all these revolutionary movements in Bengal and other parts of the country were coming up, they underlined their legitimacy precisely by arguing that the state had lost its. And if the state loses its own legitimacy, it also loses the legitimacy of being the only monopoly in the use of violence, right? And this entire idea is fundamental. And, even today, some elements in India argue that when they sort of fight the state, so to speak, right? Now, whether they are legitimate or illegitimate is an entirely different debate. But we have actually, I would argue, infantilized the debate about violence in our country, because, like everything else, we've made a caricature of that debate. Gandhi is non-violent. We did not win independence only through non-violence or only through violence. It's a far more complicated, messy, nuanced story, like everything else, right? But it has been, in a sense, an affectation of independent India that, and perhaps an affectation which was supported, implicitly or otherwise by the erstwhile colonial power, that yes, there was this wonderful moment where all this non-violent revolution happened, and there were all these marches and all these people marching on, and the colonial power felt so embarrassed and sort of went away home. But it didn't. It wasn't so simple, right? And I think it's time we look at the complexities of the whole situation.
In fact, Shruti, just to come in, because your definition of sedition and even looking at nationalism in this book, why do we still have laws of sedition in today's India? Why does 21st century India need this against its own citizens of its republic?
Well, I mean, I think the founding fathers did debate the issue, but Tilak was, as it were, the most celebrated case on sedition, and it's important simply because it's in that moment he decouples the question of law from violence. And I think that danger remains precisely because even the civil disobedience, Mahatma Gandhi said civil disobedience, is posed against the idea of the state that sedition laws are retained. They're debated. K.M. Munshi wants it off. There are others like Patel who want it on the statute. So it's not simply a colonial hangover. My personal view is that it should not be used against its own citizens. It's a colonial draconian law. But having said that, I just wanted to come back to Hindol's point that I don't think one can relativize the role of Gandhi. Gandhi is precisely important because he is working in a sea of violence, in a time when violence has really gained in persuasion, and he subtracts violence from this anti-status vocabulary and institutes a politics of the plain. So our democracy really belongs to Gandhi. The fact that you could walk for 80 kilometers and really undo the empire. We have to not forget that India is the first country to be decolonized after America from the British Empire. And Gandhi is very careful in questions. He's not sort of decrying violence just because it's a bad thing. He's actually saying it's really, really important, and how we deploy it, we have to be very careful about it. So that India's democracy actually belongs, its democratic language belongs to Gandhi's politics of mobilization and the like. So I would slightly disagree here with Hindol that it's not simply the revolutionaries or the Savarkarites, or it's precisely because they have gained an ascendancy that Gandhi has to fashion a very new kind of political philosophy.
And it's interesting, I just want to bring in Amish on that, because Amish, of course, the concept of dharma and Raj dharma also is something which of course goes back much beyond say our freedom movement. But looking at that, and really when we look at where we are today, sometimes we see that governance has become so separate from our elections and our election campaigns, which often every day touch a new law. The focus is on issues like suddenly Jinnah always revised in every election campaign. I mean, how would that be relevant to any young person today, you would ask? And the whole of who they support, this becomes so important. You were in Uttar Pradesh recently as well. Why is it that that whole concept of dharma, Raj dharma, governance goes out of the window when it comes to politics and political speeches of today? Why is Nehru or Jinnah even relevant today?
It's a little more complicated than that. I think one of the things that's happening in Indian elections is many political battles or even cultural battles that in times past may have been executed through violence now get executed through elections and political battles. I genuinely, and I'm not saying that facetiously, I genuinely believe that Indian politicians across all political parties have among the toughest jobs in the world. It's not easy being an Indian politician. I'm living in the West, and I can tell you many of the senior politicians out here, the amount of time they can take off, that they can party at various places. Indian politicians work 7 days a week. They have extremely complicated issues that they try to manage. And elections have become the battlegrounds where many cultural issues also get debated. One of the things that's happening in India, especially post 1991 with economic reforms, is it's not just development. It is social issues that were not addressed for centuries are suddenly getting addressed. Right? Many backward castes who didn't have a shot at power during the Turkic rule or European or British rule suddenly have a shot at power, and they compete through elections. I actually think it's something good that has happened. I think one of the greatest legacies of Mahatma Gandhi was not so much the independence movement. I think it was a lot more complicated while the British left, and especially the capacity to hold on to India after the Second World War was severely eroded, and their ability to hold India was largely based on the British Indian Army, and suddenly they had so many more Indian officers and soldiers. That made the entire situation far more complicated, especially after the Naval Cadet Rebellion in 1946. But I think the greatest legacy of Mahatma Gandhi is what happened post-independence. is that many Indians have come to believe that actually many issues can be sorted out through non-violence or through elections. Think of the social changes that have happened in the last 70 years. Even 100 years ago, it would have been impossible to imagine that a backward caste would have been perhaps among the most powerful full-term prime ministers India ever had. Or we've had Dalit leaders of the largest states and states which are bigger than most countries in the world. And it's all happened relatively peacefully. Per capita violence in India is actually among the lowest in the world. Boston and New York has 10 times the violence that Mumbai or Bangalore, which are the most violent cities in India, have.
Right.
All these social changes have happened with relatively low levels of per capita violence. I suspect that's because many of the changes have actually happened through elections.
Okay.
And many of the clashes have actually happened there. So it could actually be seen as, I know many people accuse me of being overly optimistic about India, but I actually see it this way.
Let me get Hindol in first and then Shruti to you. Hindol, go ahead. You want to react?
I want to take off from what both Shruti and Amish were both saying. Well, first to answer to Shruti's point, the point is not to deny Gandhi his rightful place at all. But the point is to genuinely problematize the narrative a little more. There is a tendency, at least in some parts, in India, to tell the story in a very unidirectional way. And I think Amish is also saying, to take his point, we have to take into the conversation many other elements that brought India its freedom. And by doing so, we do not negate Gandhi. We just make the story and the narrative far more rich. That's number one. Number two, to take the point about, are Indian elections particularly violent? Why do we still have Jinnah in the conversation?
Not violent, but I mean, why are they still relevant?
And why are they still relevant? Well, at least according to me, number one, they come up in a particular kind of electoral rhetoric. That's number one.
A polarizing one.
But they also resonate. So if it didn't resonate somewhere, then that rhetoric would, be used for a little while and then would die out, right? I at least think that some of it resonates, especially in North India, because India still has unfinished business with its sovereignty. It has borders where problems exist even today. Those issues are very alive in our society today. Say, for instance, Sonia, if we had a resolved border with Pakistan, if we had a resolved border with China, perhaps these issues would, even if somebody raised it, they would not find any takers. But because we still have such challenges to our sovereignty and key questions of sovereignty unanswered even today, that's why I think it resonates among some people, and therefore if it does resonate among some people, politics will always bring it up.
Okay. That's an interesting point. But Shruti, I wanted to bring you in on that because, of course, in your chapter on Mahatma Gandhi, you've written that he has the ability to both incite and inspire. So it's interesting that at this time as well, that he is seen internationally as the father of New India. In the sense, he has to be father of the nation, even for the New India. Yet there's a large section which strongly opposes. And of course, those are people who follow Veer Savarkar very much, an icon for the BJP and the ruling party. Yet he and Gandhi were so fundamentally opposed yet interlinked.
Absolutely. So I think to answer all the questions together, these founding figures have become important partly because they are iconic of particular ideas. They represent certain ideas. They're not simply heroes of the national freedom struggle. Patel stands for something, Gandhi stands for something, Savarkar stands for something. So they are in a way a kind of shorthand to kind of conveying political ideologies in India. So number two, India's kind of founding settlement, political settlement, say from 47 to 50, is now under severe challenge. I mean, it's being now recast in a particular mold since 2014. And I think, that's not breaking news. And I think for that reason, a lot of the kind of past figures are being also revised, not least by Hindol Sen Gupta here or others, in India's public life. So I think these figures are also being remade in the light of what is called New India, because actually the kind of Nehruvian Gandhian settlement of India is now being redone in the light of, say, Hindu nationalism. And as such, therefore, the psychic division, there is a psychic division in India between a Savarkar and a Gandhi. It will be very hard to put them together, synthesize them together. I mean, anyone who's doing that is running a fool's errand.
Let's look ahead at that point. I just want to get on that. If we looked ahead, Amish, really at future generations, when they look back, when do you think we will get over well, some would say not hangovers is perhaps the wrong word, but when we keep examining legacy issues, but when we talk about creating a new India, perhaps this is the focus to also create a new language of development, a new language of what the priorities are for this young India, many of whom perhaps may not even know who the different Gandhis are, or know who so little about many of these founding fathers that we talk about today in esoteric programs like the Dialogues.
I like dialogues because actually we are not shouting and screaming. We are debating, and even if disagreeing politely. So look, the key thing is that debates happen when issues are unresolved. When there is when issues that could inject poison into the body politic have not been debated openly. Sunlight is often the biggest disinfectant. Again, I'm in the West. I'm in London right now, but if you see in the US, the issue of slavery and African Americans still animates discussions there. But the debates between say the British descendants in the US and their oppressors in the British Isles is not really a debate anymore, because that issue does not animate the body politic in the US as well. I think one of the key things in India is much of our history of the last millennium has actually perhaps not been debated honestly with the poison, and debating would pull the poison out, because unfortunately the debate has got stuck between, in my opinion, two groups of extremists, left-wing extremists and right-wing extremists. With left-wing extremists wanting to say that no, the invaders were all nice people. There was no violence, we were all singing ghazals and playing the sitar, which is not really true. And the right-wing extremists would like to say that, that people like Alauddin Khilji or Aurangzeb, are direct ancestors of Indian Muslims, and Indian Muslims have to, kind of set right the thing, which is also actually not true. They were foreigners. They were clearly Turks. They were foreigners. Despite what Bollywood tells you, they did not speak Urdu. Urdu is our language. They did not look like us. They look like Central Asians, because that is what they were. And we don't confuse British rulers with Indian Christians. Why in God's name do we confuse Turkic rulers with Indian Muslims? But these issues have to be debated and discussed in a calm, reasonable manner, so that things which inject poison into the body politic can hopefully be set aside, like perhaps the US is trying to do. But these things need to be done in a calm manner. Right. In the US, I'm afraid the conversation has become too extremist on both sides. That's not going to help resolve issues. You know that Sagar Manthan story of mythology, the churning of the ocean? Amrit comes out at the end, but at the beginning there is poison, right? And at least we need to, like Lord Shiva did, take that poison out so that it doesn't add to more dissonance within the ocean.
Can I just say one thing before you go to Shruti? Poor Patel gets stuck in between always in this, Gandhi versus Savarkar debate. I think, but the Project Patel, so to speak, if I may say so, is only to really essentially give the rightful place to a man who was even denied the Bharat Ratna for the longest time, right? And this is a man who really till his dying day, who was very, very unwell, working really hard to put together the very map of India. So I feel sad that Patel gets trapped into these polarized debates. So Project Patel, I think Patel should be seen really as one of those iconic people who really worked till his very end to essentially give us the map of India.
Absolutely, and B.R. Ambedkar also often gets trapped in this new dialogue, as it were. But Shruti, the point you wanted to react to,
I wanted to say come on both, because I have written on both Patel and Ambedkar in the book. But I wanted to say very quickly to Amish's point. In Discovery of India, Nehru makes a very compelling argument that actually the British are the exceptional empire in India. They're the exceptional empire in India only because they held their loyalty elsewhere. So other empires, whether they were Muslim or Turkic or what have you, they owed their loyalty to the people of India. And I think that's a very, very compelling argument that it's actually in the long in the history of empires in India, in South Asia, it's the British who are exceptional because they are the only ones who are not loyal to the people whom they are ruling over. So that's about, that issue. And also, I think whether it is Savarkar, particularly Savarkar, who uses this kind of history, he weaponizes history to kind of write about a new kind of Hindu-ness. And I think that's why these debates become kind of difficult.
You talk about how Hindutva and Hinduism is opposed. Now that's central to today's current debate.
Absolutely.
Why do you say that?
For one, Savarkar is an atheist, and he himself says it in his political manifesto that it cannot be the same as Hinduism. And I think he's also, Amish Tripathi might not like it, he's sort of saying Puranic history doesn't belong to the history of India. He says, in his 6 glorious epochs, he starts with the first millennium, with historic Hinduism and Alexander really, and then goes all the way down. And he's interested, in fact, for him, the key conflict is not so much Islam and India, which we obviously talk a lot about, but he actually talks about the debate between the mortal conflict between Buddhism and Hinduism. He actually says Ashoka is the reason that India fails to have a center of gravity, and it's interesting because Ambedkar, who is more important than Patel, I would argue, Ambedkar, who lays down the foundations of the republic in the way that Amish Tripathi is talking about, competition of castes and the like, is actually reversing that argument. He is saying that, India cannot go far at all till it does not recognize that, caste is a political relationship bound in violence, and it takes place when Buddhism is banished out of India. So these are very live debates, in India today.
I want to take off from what Shruti just said. We were talking, and this is why we need to problematize the arguments. We began on this dialogue, right, talking about Gandhi's legacy of non-violence, right? About 15-20 minutes into the program, we are now talking about how Ambedkar really recognized where violence really lay in Indian society, right? Ambedkar did not consider Gandhi to be so non-violent after all. Sure. And if you were to seriously write about Ambedkar and seriously read Ambedkar, well, he would really disagree that Gandhi was such a pure, non-violent figure at all. And therefore, I think the modern Indian state post 1947, to go back to my original point, really pitched all these characters as monochromatic, two-dimensional characters. I think, at least for many of us who want to do serious work and who are doing serious work, our effort is to problematize the argument, to problematize the story, as we were always taught quite literally in college, right? Through our academia, we need to problematize these stories, right? Now, through the process of problematization, there would be certain polemical points that certain people would make, and that would cause argument. But I would like to put, in this dialogue at least, put to everybody that there is a need to seriously look at all these figures and all these issues once again. We may not agree, but their stories need to be rescued from their monochromatic trap.
No, and I think also as we near the end of this dialogue, Amish Tripathi, if you could come in also on this, I think really the cradles for looking at ideas, debating, dissenting, dialogues is really going to be our universities. But we now have a situation where, there's a whole focus on controversy, polarizations, what the place of religious symbols is in our university classrooms. Where do we look at education, or where do we look at safeguarding these institutions of democracy for young people if universities also become so polarized?
No, I think the best way to look at debating is actually in the ancient Indian way. Vedic Sanskrit, which is a language of our ancestors, had no translation for the English word blasphemy. The concept wasn't there, so they didn't have a word for it. Everything was open to debate. There's this wonderful book called Vada by Radha Vallabh Tripathi, no relation of mine. I'd encourage all of you to read that. And it speaks of the debating traditions in India. And even from the Natya Shastra, the examples of how everything was, including criticizing the gods, was open to debate. To the point that Shruti made of Veer Savarkar being an atheist, that's not really a problem in Hinduism. By the way,
agreed.
Many of our traditional schools of philosophy, Hinduism, Buddhism, the dharmic religions can be broken up into, depending on how you count it, 12 or 13 schools of philosophy. Many of them are actually atheists. Sankhya, Mimamsa, they don't actually believe in a creator. And the thing I would like to encourage is a revival of our ancient traditions of everything is open to debate, nothing is open to question, as long as you have some manners in the way you're speaking. And all our great men and women are open to questioning as well. And that's the way we should look at all of them. Many of them have things that we can learn from, and many of them made mistakes as well. One of the lines that is there in one of our ancient texts, which I actually use in my book, that of course you can learn from the successes of great men and women, but you often learn even more from the mistakes that great men and women made, things that you disagree with. As long as you are having open debate and nothing is beyond question, I don't believe in this. In the Western world, there's this concept of safe spaces, some things you can debate, some things that you cannot debate. No, everything should be open to debate. We were the kind that even questioned, we were the culture that even questioned our gods and goddesses. Let's have that culture.
Absolutely.
And let's relook at the founding fathers and mothers of our republic as well, and see what we can learn. And well, when we disagree, we disagree.
I couldn't agree more, Amish. I hope our lawmakers or our state police forces are listening to that, because here even comedians can't mention anything about gods and goddesses. But I fully back what you say. But Shruti, you in fact are from JNU, so welcome to your new Vice Chancellor.
Well, I mean, I won't say anything about that, but I did my master's there. I'm very indebted.
Ethnocentric.
I'm indebted to the. I'm really indebted. I'm indebted to the teaching I got there. In fact, it was a wonderful boot camp of history learning. But I think the past, as you know, Amish Tripathi very eloquently illustrates, is actually a vehicle for conveying political ideas. The past is not a foreign country, nor is it something that is completely objective. Any statement is, in fact, even whether it is Savarkar or whether it is Nehru, they used history to convey political visions. And that is what is going on even now, which is why, and the point of universities is really, really important, because I think this is about the next generation. This is precisely why we're the battle of what constitutes India. What is the collective idea of India? But also, I don't mean it just in the kind of cliche that Nehru's cliche has become. But really, what is the compact as we Indians are going to have? What is the story we are going to have? And we are debating that, I think, quite violently in India, and with degrees of unfreedom which have been unprecedented.
Well, Shruti Kapila, Hindol Sen Gupta, and Amish Tripathi, thank you so much for being on the NDTV Dialogues. It's always fascinating to hear the different perspectives, because really that is what India is all about. Thank you very much for being on the Dialogues. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.